Five Nights at Freddy's is a series that needs no introduction at this point. It has gone through many revamps of both the gameplay and the story. From the humble beginnings of FNAF 1 through 4, of revamp in sister location, and another one with Pizza Sim, and finally Security Breach, the franchise has tried a lot since 2014. 9 fucking years of this franchise and they still can't get the story over with? I mean, what the fuck is even their goal? The Return to Bloody Nights is another fan game, and I know it's a shocker at this point, but it was made by Twisted Mind Studios in collaboration with 3 really passionate devs. Kozowski, who is the creator of Twisted Mind Games, made it along Boy395 Game, Elzaga, and Seal Dude. It is a new contender for one of the best FNAF fan games, being released on March 23rd of this year actually. The game itself is based on a location that hasn't been explored in any of the FNAF games so far, which is Fredbear's Family Diner. We really don't know a whole lot about this place, although it is an important piece of the narrative of FNAF. But fuck that, chuck it out the window, because the passionate devs didn't try to tell something that's been repeated over and over again, but rather they told their own interpretation of this location and its significance. So let me tell you about the gameplay first, instead of the lore that everyone cares about more than the games themselves these days. The game is comprised of 5 nights. Shocker, I know. First thing I have to make clear is that the nights aren't referred to as night 1, 2, and so on, but rather they are just days of the week, from Monday to Saturday, since there's a 6th night as usual. Before each of the nights, we get to hear a phone call, but I'll go over that in a bit. When we start the first night, we are introduced to whatever the fuck his name is.
Hello there, I'm Waffle Brokey.
And he's our guide throughout this adventure. Yeah, let's call it that. He serves to introduce all of the game's mechanics and does a really good job at it too. The one negative thing I need to say about this phone guy in particular is he will not shut the fuck up. He talks forever and sometimes he just distracts from the gameplay and you won't even hear most of his dialogue, which is genuinely good when you listen to it. On night 1, there are 3 animatronics present: Spring Bonnie, Fredbear, and the Endoskeleton. Spring Bonnie and Fredbear work in the same way as Chica and Bonnie from FNAF 1. Fredbear takes the left door, whereas Spring Bonnie takes the right. The way we turn in this game is also a bit different from the originals and more akin to something like FNAF 4, having us move completely before seeing the other side. We do not have any power restrictions in this game, and we also have a flashlight to check if the animatronics are there. However, without power restrictions, we could just keep the doors closed, right? Correct, which is why there's generator heat. This basically works as a power system which fills up the more you use the doors. One door charges it slowly and the 2 doors, being closed at once, charge it slightly faster. The flashlight has no impact on this. You can see the generator heat in the bottom left corner of the monitor while you're looking at it, and if it overheats, the doors open and you're basically just a sitting duck waiting to get fucked. Both the animatronics can also be seen on the cameras, also again on the monitor, and you can either keep track of them or use one of the gimmicks that makes this game truly horrifying. Yeah, they will always appear at the door and make a breathing sound when they are there. They'll also scare you if you flash them while they are at the door, which you don't need to do, but you can do. You can close the door before flashing them and avoid these little mini jump scares, or just do what I did and take it like a fucking man. And once they knock on the door, they will leave and go back to the main stage before roaming once more. Final threat of night 1 is the Endoskeleton, and I have to mention something here. It is a giant misconception that the Endo is only active during night 6, but in reality he's active on all nights. There are 2 spare Endos actually, one for Fredbear and one for Spring Bonnie. Only Spring Bonnie's Endo is active. Fredbear's Endo is just a decorative piece in parts and service. The active Endo lays in front of your right door and will randomly stand up when you shine your light at the door and you need to close the door and he'll sit back down. The more you flash, the more he appears. Finally, after beating Monday night, we get a cool moment where we scan Fredbear and read off for any kind of paranormal activity. This happens after every night, so let's just move on to Tuesday night. It's the same exact song and dance, except Fungi warns us about the puppet, who actually isn't present yet. Yeah, it's kind of stupid. In the 3rd night he apologizes, but he just fucks up and says the puppet is here, when it isn't. Once again, we defend until 6 AM, and the post-night segment this time is us scanning Spring Bonnie. A bit more of the same to get us accustomed. Wednesday night, however, is the difficulty spike. The characters present are still Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, and the Endoskeleton, but along with them we have not one, but two new additions to make our stay at Fredbear's Family Diner a living hell. There's Spring Bonnie 2.0 and the Puppet. The Puppet is the easier of the two to understand. She lays in the toy box in the prize corner, which just so happens to be right behind us. Oh golly gee, fuck me. There's in a music box and there's in a door. All we have to fend her off is our measly flashlight, and thankfully it is enough. She'll make faint audio cues like jingling bells or clown chuckling, and once these happen she might be getting out of her box. I say might as it is a chance and not a guarantee. Thankfully she also has a very generous timer on flashing her to shoo her back into her box, but at moments you can easily get overwhelmed by the other new animatronic, Spring Bonnie 2.0. He has, I think, the single most creative gimmick I've seen in a while. He attacks the right door just as the regular Spring Bonnie does, and all we are told is that he's extremely quick and likes to play hide and seek, whatever that means. Well, I know what the fuck it means, and this is what it means. He will hide on cameras, something akin to Springtrap trying to be unfound on the cameras in FNAF 3, and once he reaches the closest camera to your door, he'll begin covering his face directly in front of the camera and trying to tear his eyes off. Once he's looked at, he'll assume you found him and take it that you are now the hider, and dash to your room with only a slight window to react. The easiest way to react to him is to close the door when he's in the second to last stage before his dash, but on the later nights that obviously won't work as it is much tighter, the generator heat. So keep an eye on him and use the sound cues for the rest of the animatronics to minimize door usage. Keeping an eye on Spring Bonnie 2.0 is the key to victory as it slows him down somewhat like Foxy from the original FNAF. After that hellish smack back to reality, the post-night segment has us scan Spring Bonnie 2.0, once again finding no fishy business. Thursday night introduces the second to last character, which is Fredbear 2.0. He works in another really interesting fashion. Nice spelling, dumbass. He stands outside of our left door, following the trend of bears on the left and rabbits on the right. However, instead of being visible on the cameras, he comes outside of a closet, which is a blind spot from the cameras. This means whenever we flash our light in the hallway, he will always be present, making us nervous and making eerie and distracting noises, because his voice box is malfunctioning, as the phone guy says. He has 4 stages of appearing, I guess. One where he just straight up isn't there, second one where he's peeking from the closet, a third one where he's reaching out from behind this wall to get us, and the final one where he hunches down and stares at us. The final stage is key to understand as we from the phone guy know that he is very slow. What this means is it takes him a whole 10 seconds to attack us after entering his final stage. After the 10-second timer, he will either obviously kill you or knock on the door really hard before leaving. This is insanely smart as it makes him a pain to deal with, especially later on, as you can't exactly gauge the time perfectly. And the other thing that makes him a decent bit harder to understand and avoid is animatronic overlap. It exists just as it did in FNAF 2, but it works a lot better actually. The first improvement to the problem of overlap is making each animatronic have their own leaving sound, or rather not. In FNAF 2, all the animatronics had the same entering and same leaving sound, so it was really hard to gauge who was there when, but it was fine as it had one door and vents. The other improvement that is much better than in FNAF 2 is just the straight up lower amount of animatronics. From FNAF 2's 11 to this game's 5, it makes it much easier because only 2 can even overlap at any given time. It is a bit AIDS at moment if you get really unlucky, but if you listen carefully, it is fully avoidable and isn't that big of a problem in the grand scheme of things. And finally, after another hellish difficulty increase, we get to the post-night segment where we can scan Fredbear 2.0 and actually get a reaction. Wait, that's bad. Yeah, we sense a spirit in Fredbear 2.0 and not a lot is said about this directly. But anyhow, we start Friday night with all the same threats as before, but here's where I will mention the last characters present. Firstly, there's the golden cupcake. It's, well, a golden cupcake. It doesn't threaten us, but rather is just a distraction covering up cameras and making it in general harder to see, and getting all up in your fucking space. The next ones up are the shadow animatronics. These are Shadow Freddy, Shadow Bunny, or They don't really do jack shit besides appearing on the cameras as Easter eggs. But finally, I can end this segment and talk about the story, but before that, I just want to mention Saturday Night does exist, as I mentioned, but it's just a Harder Night 5 with no new gimmicks. The game tells its own headcanon of one of the most controversial points of the story.
Was that the bite of 87?
No, not that controversial point of the story, but rather the bite of 83, so close enough. The story itself is told through phone calls between two friends, William Afton and Henry Emily, two names we are all very accustomed to. And yes, we are told their names directly through the conversation, unlike in the actual fucking games. Throughout these calls, it's explained that Afton is opening his first restaurant due to Henry having success with his location and wanting to throw his hat in the ring. They talk about the progress on final week before opening, as well as their families and family problems. This headcanon of the devs, Afton and his wife are divorced before any of the many events people have speculated. Afton confides in Henry, explaining how Michael and Evan are being influenced by their mother's lies. Elizabeth chooses to stay by her father's side. All of them are irrelevant for now except Elizabeth, who ends up being the victim of the bite. One of the animatronics, fuck if I know which one, bites Elizabeth in a moment where she comes too close for comfort. Afton, being enraged by this, goes berserk, and his jealousy of Henry shows even more. He snaps, saying he has everything that he has ever wanted, and because of this, he doesn't wish to have it as well, but rather he wishes that Henry would lose it all. Upon saying that, we flash to a monologue after the final night, where he says it wasn't really jealousy, but rather he had made the animatronics for the purpose of killing, and Elizabeth was just caught in the crossfire in his attempt to kill Henry's daughter, Charlotte. This is where the story ends and the canon story would begin, I think. But additionally, after beating the 6th night, or rather Saturday night, get introduced to Charlotte's spirit, and this begins her heroic monologue about sensing others who had met the same fate as her, because William fucking killed her. And wanting to save them and prevent him from killing anybody else. Finally, we get shown who we actually played as. Played as Scott Coffin, who was doing an exceptional job, and because of that was transferred to a new location to be a night guard and record instructional tapes for newbies. This doesn't have much lore significance, but it is a nice callback to Scott voicing the phone guy in FNAF 1.
Hello? Hello?
In the FNAF 1 location, where he is sent to after this game's locations. Finally, before moving on, I want to talk about the portrayals of William and Henry. It's pretty well accepted that William and Henry are antitheses of each other, and each represent a side, with their daughters portraying the same thing but slightly more twisted. The portrayal of Henry, I firmly believe, is almost spot on to what Scott had imagined, even though I can't imagine what he imagined. A soft-spoken genius who originally even gave the idea of these robot ran pizzerias with a strong sense of family. It even aligns in the storytelling aspects that Henry is actually the originator of the idea that William steals. Now for Afton. I think his portrayal is a bit more off. It feels like just a standard villain during the final night speech, and it doesn't really make sense that Afton just built the robots to kill from the start. And it would actually make more sense if they continued with the portrayal of his jealousy. Henry having no prior issues in his family or business in comparison to William struggling with business and having a fractured family, it would really drive someone mad forever being second place after pouring your heart and soul into everything. Now, the two other slightly less important characters that I also have to mention are Charlotte and Elizabeth. Let's go with Charlie or Charlotte first, as she's a decent amount more important. She's primarily depicted according to Henry's infamous speech from FNAF 6 or Pizzeria Simulator.
My daughter, if you can hear me, I knew you would return as well. It's in your nature to protect the innocent. I'm sorry that on that day, the day you were shut out and left to die, no one was there to lift you up into their arms, the way you lifted others into yours. And then, what became of you? I should have known you wouldn't be content to disappear. Not my daughter. I couldn't save you then, so let me save you now. It's time to rest, for you, and for those you have carried in your arms. This ends, for all of us, in communication.
And it's a pretty spot-on portrayal in the small scene that we see from her. She wants to help those that she can instead of being bitter at the world. On the contrary is Elizabeth. In the real canon, almost everything points to her being killed by Circus Baby, but here she is supposedly a victim of the bite, but it's also not confirmed, but it's also... Anyway, in this game we don't get the developer's idea of her translated that well, but we can guess that in their next project she will play a much larger part and will probably portray the opposite of Charlie. Charlie is mad at Afton and wants to save who she can from him, to whereas Elizabeth doesn't blame her father, but still cherishes him and will do anything to make his schemes that she ruined succeed. That might have sounded like a lot, but the real game's canon is much more complicated and worse. So to wrap this up, let me talk a bit about just other things that make this game as frightening and exceptional as it actually is. One of the absolute first things I have to mention is the jump scares. They are insanely loud and fast, and even have a bit of the scare factor from FNAF 4. In FNAF 4 you peer into the darkness listening, and that just made every single jump scare pop out that much more because you were listening really hard. And that's also what made it the scariest game in the series, no but. In this game you semi-look into darkness, but the biggest differences from all the other FNAF games I've played is the way they utilize these amazing jump scares. Depending on where you're currently looking, the animatronic will either lunge at you from the door or will pull you to their face and then jump scare you. Those just add to the scare factor and unexpectedness of it. Oh yeah, there's also the puppets just jump scare. Puppet doesn't even kill you and it just looks so fucking goofy. This is the single bad jump scare in the game. So yeah, that's pretty dope. Just like the office that we are sat in. It has a lot of small references like a picture of Henry and William, a Funko Pop of Fredbear and Spring Bonnie, the certificate of completion from FNAF Pizza Sim, and it's just brimming with personality in general and makes it that small bit cooler because of this. Another thing I have to mention is there is this minigame. It's cool that they added a minigame, but it's also just way disappointing that it just does nothing. And it's also very rare to get. It requires you to get a code from your fan on a random chance and input it into the keypad next to the monitor. Now, the final thing I have to gush about is the camera frames. They are fucking flawless. Each frame is so carefully put together and positioned to have the creepiest camera experience that you can have. Also, the fact that they slightly move makes it feel that much more uneasy and alive. Their movement in general also just feels very robotic, and that's amazing to see people finally learning how to move robots. To add to all of this, the general designs of the animatronics are just so fucking good as well. It brings new life to what we thought for years was just a piss Freddy and a piss Bonnie. And the 2.0 designs are also insanely sick, and I can ignore the blatant lore complication because the gameplay is better because of them. With only 2 animatronics, there's not much that you can do, but with 4 and even Puppet, so 5, you can do a lot more. Final thing I have to say about this game as well is also how fucking exceptionally it brings FNAF back to its roots. It explores a location we haven't seen in the games. It makes it feel not just older than ever, as it is the first location, but also making an amazing classic fan game with all the passion clearly poured into the project really seeping through. So yeah, that's about it for this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll keep trying to make more videos I like, and if you did enjoy, thanks, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.